Hi everybody, it's January 23rd, 2025, and this is part of my video journal to recover from the trauma of watching my little brother, Paul Kierans, 64, with Down syndrome, whom I grew up with and who I cared for, who I've lived within 30 miles of him for the last 35 years. He was locked up by the BC New Democratic Party government when I complained to the police about a secret and, in my opinion, fraudulent and forged power of attorney the government created over Paul to give him the COVID-19 shot on February 6th of 2021. So when I found out that there was a secret. Just hang on. I'm at my favorite spot. One of my favorite spots. Starbucks. Just waiting for our meeting to start. First of all, I want to thank everybody that's hung in with me and watched these videos and listened to me. Because that's part of the healing process, is being listened to. So Paul was locked up. I had an agreement with the government that I could visit with Paul and he could visit with me. I'm the 8th of 9 children and he was the 9th of 9 children. And everybody in Greater Vancouver around us had died or moved away. So we were the only family members left in Greater Vancouver. And I had an agreement with them that I could visit with him twice a week, once at his group home, which was run by L'Arche, and that's a whole other story. They were started as an SEX cult, and that didn't come out until 2019. And I had an agreement with them that I could visit with him for an hour at the group home on Thursday afternoon. So that's what I would be doing right now. And from 2 till 7 every Saturday, he could come to my apartment, which he loved. He did not want to leave. He was a wonderful person. He was hardworking and just the distilled essence of what it is to be a good human being. We were like Hansel and Gretel. And the person that the government, that David Eby appointed Paul's guardian, was like the evil witch in the woods. My sister, I have a Catholic nun sister 4,000 kilometers away in Ontario who moved out when Paul was born. I don't remember ever living with her. She fancies herself to be an angel of death, and she has nothing to do with anybody in our family. But if she senses somebody's dying, she flies in. And she takes over their finances. She started cashing checks out of my mother's bank account before my mother died. Anyways, that is the person that David Eby appointed to be the guardian of my little brother. And I went to the Supreme Court of Canada twice, trying to have our visits restored and then trying to be appointed Paul's guardian, but I couldn't. Paul never had a lawyer. You might wonder, well, how could this happen? You know, Kathleen, you must be some horrible person and we just don't know it. No, Paul never had a lawyer. He never had, even this fraudulent and forged power of attorney was signed in front of 2 of L'Arche's group home workers. And I believe that they forged his signature. It looks nothing like his signature. So for 588 days, he was locked up, and I was not able to get them to restore the visits. And I just want to say, that's a form of torture. When you have a loved one that you want to visit and you know would like to visit you and you can't, it feels like torture. And then on April 15th, I got an email from my sister's evil lawyer. She's got a little little shyster twit of a lawyer. Well, she has 2 huge law firms working for her, and the Catholic Church has spent almost $1 million now on her representation. I mean, you'd need to spend that much to have an evil witch appointed the guardian of an... It's never happened in British Columbia before. No one who resides outside of British Columbia has ever been appointed the guardian of an incapable adult who resides in BC in history. But they found a way to appoint my sister. And the reason they did it is I didn't have a lawyer and Paul didn't have a lawyer. And of course, David Eby is the most evil government person to hold government office in British Columbia. So on April 15th, I get an email from my sister's evil lawyer saying that Paul had a stroke and I could visit him. I could arrange through the evil lawyer to visit Paul, and I dropped everything and I took a taxi to Burnaby Hospital. And Paul, when I walked in the room, Paul grabbed my hand. He squeezed it so hard it was like a vice. And I said, "Paul, it's Kathleen." And I at that point hadn't seen him for 588 days, and he hadn't seen me. All that we were allowed was a 10-minute phone call on Fridays, and they wouldn't even do that half the time. Evil Larsh wouldn't even allow that. This is the worst miscarriage of justice in Canadian history, and that's saying a lot, because the Canadian justice system is replete with story after story after story of failed justice. Anyway, so I get a phone call on April 15th. And actually, Paul had the stroke 2 days earlier, but they wanted to see if he would die. But he hung on. And when I saw him, he held my hand so tight. And then I was only allowed to visit him for 10 minutes, so I just sat in the hallway. So for the 10 days that he was alive, I sat in the hall, out in the lobby for 10 to 12 hours every day. And then I had a visit with Paul where he sat up and he brought him a big book of movie stars that a neighbor had given me. He grabbed the book from my hand and he turned the pages perfectly, and he had an oxygen mask over his face so he couldn't talk. But he turned the pages perfectly and he scanned the pictures perfectly and he looked me in the eye. So he was struggling to recover. And I had posted on Facebook a little note saying what a miracle that was, that he'd sat up and he grabbed his book from my hand and he was struggling to recover. And the next day, he appeared to me to be sedated, over-sedated. And I said to the charge nurse, I said, "It looks like you're over-sedating him." And she said, "I make my own observations." They had been given this piece of paper, the fraudulent document that my sister claimed gave her all the rights over my little brother, the evil nun. Oh, she's almost a cartoon character. She's so evil. Just think of her as the wicked witch in the forest sitting in the candy house that the Hansel and Gretel visited. And so at about 6:30 on Sunday, April 21st, I get a phone call from the RCMP. And I thought, what's this about? And the RCMP officer, Dean Urquhart, Staff Sergeant Dean Urquhart, said they'd been ordered by Ottawa to reopen the investigation into the fraudulent and forged power of attorney. And he was going to send me a letter about that. And I couldn't believe it. I just couldn't believe my ears. But what I now know is that the Burnaby RCMP tipped off the evil nun's lawyers first, because the letter that I got that evening was a month old. So they went to the nun's lawyers and they said, "Look, we've been ordered by Ottawa to reopen the investigation." So the nun knew that she was being investigated by the police, and she had her lawyers apply to have me declared a vexatious litigant. So that's an application. It's very, very rare, but it's an application. If somebody's wasting court time, using up the court for, frivolous reasons, they can be declared a vexatious litigant. And I went to court the next day. The day after the police staff sergeant Urquhart informed me that they had reopened the investigation. I went to court and I told the judge, I said, there's a break in the case. The police are investigating my sister, and I asked that the minister be appointed Paul's guardian in place of the evil nun. But we didn't get on. And within 24 hours of the nun finding out that I knew she was being investigated by the Burnaby RCMP, Paul was dead. The next time, when I went into his room at about 6 o'clock on April 22nd, the nun had got him into a room where the nursing staff couldn't see her, where it was just her and Paul. And it had a door that would close, and she'd closed it off. And Paul's oxygen mask had been removed, and he looked like he had been drugged. His eyes were wide open. And the nun said to me, she wouldn't look me in the eye. Never trust somebody. This is the piece of advice I can give you. Never trust anybody that won't look you in the eye. They're lying. So she said, say goodbye to Paul. He's dying. And her jaw was set. And she was pissed. She was pissed that the police were finally investigating her shenanigans. And Paul looked to me like he was dead at that point. I squeezed his hand and it was not responsive. It wasn't cold, but it wasn't responsive. His eyes were wide open and unfocused. He looked to me. I think he was dead at that point. But as soon as the evil nun learned that I knew she was being investigated by the police, she had Paul's oxygen mask removed and had him sedated, I believe, with hydromorphone. He did not need to be sedated at all. He was not in any pain at all. He was perfectly comfortable, but his little heart couldn't handle having the oxygen mask removed and being sedated. And I know she told the doctor, this dirty little doctor that was wandering around, to take his oxygen mask away, all his medical supports, and kill him. And he could not consent to medical assistance in dying. So Paul was dead within 24 hours of the nun learning that I knew she was being investigated by the Burnaby RCMP. So what's happened since then? The nun flew into Vancouver for a week in November, and there was a week-long hearing to have me declared a vexatious litigant. And the judge, Judith Hoffman, so they took the judge that had seized himself of the case out. He was a Jewish guy named Peter Edelman, and they parachuted in who I believe is a Catholic judge. And she was like this little sadist. I told her I'm disabled and I have medical certificates saying I can't be in court for longer than 2 hours per day. And the second day she went over 2 hours, and I said, I can't stay. It's beyond 2 hours. And she said, oh, can't you sit in the gallery? A real sadistic little, I don't even know how to describe her, biased. And she went on for 2 full days after that. And then she declared me a vexatious litigant. So I've just found out that I have leave to appeal to the Supreme Court of British Columbia, the Court of Appeal of British Columbia. And if I'm not, it's to set aside the vexatious litigant designation. And I've got a feeling that the Catholic Church has cut off the nun's funds, because she only had one lawyer show up the last time we were in court at the Court of Appeal. And there's a case management conference on February 3rd. So that's where things are at now. So thank you again for everybody who's watching these videos and sharing this tragic story. I've written the CBC, CTV, Vancouver Sun, every news outlet, every podcaster, everyone, the Down Syndrome Society of Canada, the Down Syndrome Society of BC, the Disability Alliance of BC, and they never respond. except to say, we're not responding. So it's, it's a tragedy. 2 disabled people. I'm legally a disabled person. I've got a brain injury, potentially lethal heart condition, and I've got lupus. I almost died from kidney failure in 2021. So we're being tortured. Paul was locked up and tortured until he died, and now I'm being tortured. But we're going to win. We're going to win. And so that's it for now. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And I believe that the algorithm, the YouTube algorithm and the Facebook algorithm is suppressing these videos. I have reason to believe that. So please share it far and wide. Thank you, everybody.